This video is going to talk about division of rational numbers, including positives and negatives. And to start that, we need to review our multiplication sign rules when we're working with integers, meaning positive and negative numbers. If you remember, this is how we set up our chart. The sign of the first number times the sign of the second number equals the sign of your product. And the most basic would just be a positive times a positive, which gave you a positive. Next, we talk about what if you had one of each. So what if I was multiplying a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive? And those actually both gave you a negative product. And the last one would be a negative times a negative, which gave you a positive. If we remember, the ones that have the same sign, so here and here, give you a positive product, where if they have different signs, like the two rows in the middle, they give you a negative product. The good news is that with the division, it shares the same sign rules as multiplication, so there aren't new rules that we have to remember. We're still looking at what signs of the numbers you have, and are they the same or are they different? So here's 3 examples for you, and these 3 examples also show you the different ways that division problems can be written. So let's take a look at the first one. It says 21 divided by negative 7. I have one sign of each, a positive and a negative, so I know that's going to give me a negative number. And really I just divide like before. So 21 divided by 7 gives me 3, so my answer is negative 3. Over here I have negative 24 divided by negative 8. A negative divided by a negative will give me a positive. 24 divided by 8 is 3, so that is equal to positive 3. Then the last one here at the bottom says negative 100 divided by 10. Negative divided by a positive will be a negative, and 100 divided by 10 is 10. So my final answer is negative 10. Dividing with decimals is very different than multiplying with decimals. And to divide with decimals, I'm actually going to use long division. So hopefully you watched the video to review how to do long division. So first I'm going to set it up. 13.8 needs to be my number on the inside of that long division symbol, and 6 goes on the outside. If you notice, I wasn't too worried about the signs of my numbers. I should just keep in mind that a negative divided by a negative is going to give me a positive. So I go about my long division in the same way. The trick with dividing with decimals is that I actually keep my decimal point lined up with where it is in the number that I'm dividing. So I'm going to keep it right above that point in the 13.8 and keep it there so that my answer is correct. So now I look at, well, how many times can 6 go into 1? And that's 0, so I need to look at how many times 6 goes into 13, which is 2. I'm going to subtract 12, which came from 6 times 2, and I have 1. Bringing down my 8 then, I'm looking at now how many times does 6 go into 18, which is 3. Minus 18 gives me 0, and since there's nothing else, that's when I know I'm finished. So coming back up to the original problem, negative 13.8 divided by negative 6. At the beginning I said I knew I was going to be a positive, so my answer is positive 2.3. So again, the trick with dividing with decimals is to actually keep that decimal point lined up in your long division. Let's look at a trickier example now where both numbers have a decimal. And when you're dividing with decimals and you set up your long division, you actually don't want there to be a decimal point in the number that you're dividing by on the outside of that symbol. So the fact that this 1.6 here has a decimal is a problem for me because I don't want a decimal out here that I just underlined in green. So with math, what you're allowed to do when you're dividing is multiply each number by 10, which essentially all that does is move the decimal place over 1. So really now I'm looking at 48 divided by 16, and since division works like ratios, these are going to be coming out to the same answer, meaning 48 divided by 16 is the exact same thing as 4.8 divided by 1.6. So I'm going to set up my long division now as this new expression of 48 divided by 16. Really, my decimal point would be here, so I know it would be there in my answer, just in case I need it. So now I'm going to think of how many times 16 goes into 48. And you can do some mental math to check. You could try like 16 times 2, which would only give you 32, so that's not quite enough. But what if I did 16 times 3? 3 times 6 is 18, carry that 1 over, and that would give me 48 exactly. So 16 goes into 48 3 times, minus 48. I get 0, so I know I'm finished. So 4.8 divided by 1.6 actually equals 3 with no decimals. Pretty neat. So the general rule of thumb, if you're dividing with decimals and the number that you're dividing by has a decimal, move it over however many places you need to get it to be a whole number. Just make sure you do it to the other number. So the fact that I had to move it to the right one in 1.6 means I also had to do that for 4.8. If I had to move it twice, same thing, but I would have to move it twice with the other number as well. The good news is that dividing with fractions is much easier. The key is that you just have to remember to use the reciprocal of the second fraction. And the reciprocal is a fancy word of really the flip or opposite of the second fraction. So if I'm looking at this problem of negative 4/5 divided by 2/3, 2/3 is the fraction that I want to flip or get the reciprocal of. To do that, I just switch the numerator and the denominator. So that would be 3/2 of the reciprocal of 2/3. Now, why you use the reciprocal is essentially to change it to multiplication. We're saying that negative 4/5 times 3/2, 3/2 being the reciprocal of 2/3, is exactly the same thing as negative 4/5 divided by 2/3. So why we switch it is because if you remember multiplication of fractions, we just multiply across the top and multiply across the denominators. So I'm really doing negative 4 times 3 over 5 times 2. With our sign rules, I know that that's equal to negative 12 over 10, which I can simplify by dividing both numbers by 2. So my final answer is going to be negative 6/5. So with fractions, just remember, flip the second fraction and then multiply straight across. Keep your sign rules in mind.